Everyone to another edition of our virtual Regen classroom. As always, we'd like to have your undivided attention, be interactive, ask questions, nod along the way because we can see you and we always love that. And it's always good to see all your friendly faces. And if you haven't checked out the Soil Learning Centre, that is our new artwork that's on the screen. It's the first time it's made it there. And we worked with a designer there to really highlight the importance of the seed and the biome around the seed and in the soil and the depth of the roots to then give us the green leaf and the power of soil of those two combining colors. And so we had a lot of fun designing that with the team here, and we're very excited to keep focusing our efforts in making the Soil Learning Centre the place to learn everything about what's happening under our beautiful feet. We are not joined by Helen and Hugo tonight. They are babysitting. And before we go on, I'm going to the elephant in the room, because if Helen does join, she's going to announce it, and maybe Bella will as well. Today is my birthday. So 1st of July, I am officially a financial year new baby here in Australia, and probably the reason why I got excited into business, get very excited every year when the new financial year starts. So elephant out of the room, just so there's no surprises, that it is my birthday today, and I've had a good relaxing day. And this is the only bit of work which I don't call this work, this is fun. So Geoff, welcome to the room. We're super excited to have you back with us today to do part 2 of all the amazing information you weren't able to fit into part 1.
Oh, thank you very much, Ray. Will I share my screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and share that. Perfect.
Excellent.
We can see the right screen now. Yep.
Very good. All right. So welcome wherever you are watching this video or joining us from. I'm on the land of the Turrbal and Juggerah people here in Nyanjung, which we Whiteys call Brisbane. And since we're all working with the land, it's very important for us to acknowledge how important the land is to the traditional owners of this land. And we can just imagine if we'd been working our land for 650 centuries, what it would be like to, you know, be pushed off that by other people. Now, tonight, well, just introducing myself, I think everyone in the room has met me last week, but if you're watching this online, my name is Geoff Ebbs. I work at Griffith University researching what we call sustainability transitions. So it's just fancy way of saying becoming sustainable through urban food provision. So a lot of people are moving to cities. We need to think about how we're going to feed ourselves without carting everything around in trucks and wrapped in plastic. I spent a bit of time promoting my recent book, Your Life, Your Planet. And what I'm here talking to you tonight about is business thinking for food providers. So my business, Great Notion Consulting, talks to different creatives and inventors and environmental people about how to organise their business. And so because of my PhD, that's increasingly engaged with people who are involved in the provision of food, whether that's production, processing or distribution. Now you'll remember from last week that my family were Yarra Valley farmers, and I made the comment last week that Pa loved the land, was my grandfather, Tom loved the fruit, and Ray loved the money. So tonight we are here to talk about the importance of money as part of our business thinking. And so we will talk about money as a subject. What is the value of money and how does that relate to us as producers of food? Then we'll look at the customer, and then we'll get into the process of business. So as you would have seen last week, what I like to do is introduce quite a few different high-level concepts so that we've got different ways of thinking about things, and then drill down into the detail and see how those high-level concepts can be put to work for us actually in making practical decisions in our business. So let's get stuck into the conversation about money. Now, I've used this cartoon about the idea of your money or your life. The phrase indicates to us how important money is in our life. In fact, one of the cartoons that came up when I was looking for cartoons that used the phrase "your money, your life" was a very rich person going, "Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it." And so I think that the point of using that phrase is that we value money so highly, especially in this society where we hear conversations about economic growth and so on every day. It's important to recognise that the role of money is very significant in our society. Now, the value of money is not necessarily the same as the importance of money, but we need to understand why money is important. So this is a picture of Charles Dickens with a modernisation of his comment about the importance of money. What we're really saying is that we need money so we don't go broke. If you don't have enough money, it's very hard to do other things. People who've fallen through the cracks of society and are homeless, for example, don't have anywhere to wash their clothes, so it's hard to get a job, so it's very hard to get out of that trap of poverty. People who have visa problems, for example, find it very hard to get a job, and so then they find it very hard to get a accommodation, and then they get trapped in that spiral of poverty. So Dickens' point is that if we make more than we spend, we can go forward, whereas if we spend more than we make, that leads to what he termed as misery. Here's another way of viewing money. Money can become a problem. When we worship money, we go out of control. And a lot of the things that we see wrong with the environment that we live in today and with our society can be attributed to the worship of money, the overvaluation of building wealth, and also building wealth for a small number of people. So we have a tradition in the Christian West of believing that the worship of money is the root of all evil, but we don't act on it. So from a religious point of view, you might say the money changers are back in charge of the temple. And perhaps it's time to get out the whip and drive them out again. But that's not the only view of money. This fellow, Deepak Chopra, runs an organisation called the Chopra Centre, and he has a very, very popular 21-day meditation program, meditating on the concept of abundance. And during that 21 days, essentially, he encourages you to make friends with money. The meditation on one of those days is, money is good, money is my friend, money allows me to do things. And so, you know, some people think of money as being problematic or even evil. Other people think of money as being an enabler, something that empowers you, and something as being good. So the way that we were brought up and our attitudes to money are really important to understand, because that probably shapes the way that we feel about business, about banking, about writing an invoice, about being involved in the sales process. So I know a lot of creative people who don't like talking about money. They don't like selling things. They don't like charging people for their work because they think of money as being running against their grain as creative people. Now, I've showed you a slide like this before. In my PhD, I'm framing the history of the world, the history of money and the history of agriculture in this landscape. It's basically got two axes. One axis moving from equitability to exploitativeness. So in the beginning, we were equitable. We shared things, and increasingly we exploit each other to get ahead. And so when we have less than 1% of the world owning more than 99% of the wealth, we would say that that small number of people are exploiting the rest of us to get very, very rich. So the history is that human society has moved from living harmoniously with nature in an equitable way in that top right-hand corner, which we might describe as indigenous agriculture, through traditional agriculture to our modern industrial global agribusiness, which is crashing into the limits of the world to support it. Now, you might say that that's a bit abstract and that there's not necessarily a relationship between money and agriculture, but increasingly archaeologists are finding that the first farms appeared with the first cities and the first money. And so it's not just a continual process that we became better and better at harnessing nature until we had a surplus of food. It seems to be the case that what happened is that as armed conflict became a dominant way of gaining power, of organising society, the requirement to feed the army meant that the king had to extract a surplus from the farmers to feed the army. And so that the need for the army drove the need for forms of farming that created a surplus, and thus began the journey to extracting from the soil. So that's one way to think about the history of money and the history of farming and how they go hand in hand. And I could talk about that for a long time, but that's not what we're really here to talk about. It's just one more way to look at the money, the history of money and its role in food. Now, another way to look at money, this is what we might call impact investing. So this is a graph that is seen in a lot of social enterprise presentations. We can use money to create a positive impact. And so this graph says that traditional enterprise, the bar on the left here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see what my cursor when I move it, Ray? No.
No, but up in the top screen, if you go to view options, there is a way that you can annotate. So I don't know if you can enable that, but you can annotate some.
Okay. Yeah, so if I point, no, that's not going to work. All right. Anyway, the purple bar on the left there, that's labelled traditional enterprise, and it's concerned about getting revenue. So it's pointing in the direction of revenue. Charity, the blue bar down the bottom, is pointing in the direction of impact. So when we lend money to charity, we only expect that money to be used to feed people who don't have food or house people who don't have housing. That's the nature of charity. It provides some positive impact, which is, social or environmental. Whereas money doesn't do any of those things, it just worries about, business doesn't do any of those things, it just worries about making money. So the red bar, social enterprise, does a bit of both. It makes money and then uses that money for social or environmental good. That's the nature of social enterprise. When we think about how that might map onto my history of the world, though, it doesn't really work. It doesn't map onto that axis. Social enterprise certainly drives towards justice, equitability, and environmental outcomes, being regenerative rather than extractive. So social enterprise is pointing in the right direction. Charity is pointing in the right direction because it's helping lead to equitability. But what we would say is that traditional business, which is worried about a return on investment, is generally pointing in the direction of becoming more exploitative and more extractive, because that's how we maximise the return on investment in traditional business. And so we need to think about whether that social enterprise model works for us in our activity. A slightly different way to think about that, this is a graphic of mine from about 2005. Your customer needs, together with your business process, generate a profit, and we can use that profit to realise our higher purpose. So the term profit for purpose was just emerging when I created this diagram, and that's very similar to the idea of social enterprise. And what it means is unless you have profit, you can't invest that in your whatever you consider to be your higher purpose. So how do we apply that to our life in providing food? One way to look at that is what's the difference between a farm and a farming business? So that's really what we're sort of here to talk about tonight. And I'm suggesting that the difference is largely money. So as a farmer, we might be more concerned about the production of food. We might be concerned about how we produce that, or the quality of what we produce. But that's the activity of farming. If we're thinking about a business, we have to be worrying about the money as well. And so money has an important role. It's the essential difference between just having a farm and having a farming business. Which is not to say that if I turned up to your farm with a big double stuffed full of cash and dumped it on your paddock, that we would create a farming business. But I'm sure you would enjoy the process. Not that I'm promising to do that either. So that's my quick overview of a whole bunch of different ideas about money, and you can see that they are related and interrelated. And what I'm saying is that it's important that we understand how we think about money, how we value money, because if we're going to think about our farming business, we're going to have to deal with money, and we're going to have to understand our attitudes towards it. Now, the next thing that we need to think about is the customer. So the traditional line since the 60s is the customer is king. If we have a business, we need to take into account what the customer wants. Now, the problem with a farming model, the graph's probably so small you can't really see it very clearly. The important thing is it's got a lot of squiggly lines all over it. And you've got stuff flowing everywhere. And so sometimes it's a little bit hard to identify who your customer is, because essentially you're part of a complex supply chain, and the customers are the people down the supply chain from you. They're the people that you supply. A much simpler way to think about it is the customer is the person who puts money in your bank account. Also answers the question about why do you care? Why is the customer important to you? Because they're the person who puts money in your bank account. And so if you sell to a co-op and they sell to the customers, then the co-op is the person that you need to think about when you were thinking about what does the customer need or want? How do I keep my customer happy? Am I getting the kind of things, or do I have the kind of relationship with my customer that's necessary? You're not thinking about the people who ultimately eat your food. You're thinking about the co-op, because they're the people who put the money in your bank account. If you sell to a market and you're selling directly to the customer, if you sell at a market and you're selling directly to the customers who do eat your food, then that's a different story. If you're selling to a wholesaler, so on and so on. And so we talked about last week when we were talking about what your passion, what makes you excited about knowing where you want to be in the supply chain and knowing who you want to deal with as a customer. And so that same concept comes back here to knowing about your customer, because that's how you're going to have to frame your business. The way that we benefit as business people from understanding our customers is that essentially we think about our business as a process, and that process converts the customer need into money. Now, I need to tie up my shoes. If you have shoelaces that meet my need, then I will pay you money to get the shoelaces to keep the shoes on my feet. And so a lot of time in business courses and sales courses and marketing courses and branding courses is spent on understanding customer needs. And it's a whole area and discipline in itself, but fundamentally, it's pretty simple. It's a matter of putting yourself in the customer's shoes and trying to think like the customer does. The important thing to remember, though, is that no one needs a drill. What they really need is a hole. So when you're putting yourself in the customer's shoes, you've got to think like the customer, not think about what your interaction with the customer is. The person selling drills understands what kind of drills customers get excited about, whether they like tungsten-tipped drill bits or whether they like drill bits that are useful for doing wood and steel and all of those things. So if you sell drills, you might understand a lot about what customers think about drills, but you're still not really thinking like the customer. The customer's standing in front of you in your hardware store because they need a hole. And so that line comes from marketing thinking, where you're trying to think a bit more creatively about what your relationship is with the customer. One way that you can do that is to use what is called, or this representation is called, the customer empathy map. So we can just draw a picture of a face, and then we can identify what the senses are. We can say, what do they hear? What do they say? What do they see? What are they thinking? And so by breaking down the actual words that, or the thoughts or the messages that the customers are saying themselves, seeing or hearing, you can think about more, you can get into the frame of mind of the customer, develop some empathy, and really understand the difference between the hole and the drill. And the two blocks down the bottom, what is the pain that the customer is feeling and what is the gain that you are offering them? That's the traditional way of marketing to customers. If you think about the classic advertisement, the headache pill, it always starts with, "Ow, ow, I've got a headache," or "Is your back hurting?" with a red throbbing, light on the back in the television screen. That's the pain. And then there will be some kind of evidence that your product solves that problem. 90% of people who took Panadol went running on the beach the next day. And so that's the gain. And then it ends with a call to action. Buy this product from your nearest pharmacy, or whatever the call to action is. So identifying the pain and the gain is the basis of selling things to customers. But that's why it's important to understand whether your customer is a wholesaler or a network of sustainable farmers, or a market, or people who are coming to eat jam and scones on your front deck, or come and pick strawberries from your strawberry patch. The other thing that we can do is that we can change our relationship with our customers so that we've got a stronger relationship with them. This is a sign on somebody's lawn. It says organic lawn care, and it's got a cute line that says, "Touch me, I'm organic." The point of showing you that slide is that the person who bought the lawn or bought the lawn seed is demonstrating their pride in that product. They are advertising. So your customers can advertise your service for you. Your customer could be spreading the word for you through word of mouth. The idea of customer loyalty programs is that your customers become, that you know how loyal your customers are. You know how effective it is. It's much easier to sell to someone who you already have a relationship with, and it's much more trustworthy to get a recommendation from someone who's already using a product. So your existing customers are potential marketing people, they're potential salespeople, and they're certainly the people most likely to buy new products from you. So partner up with your customers is the first step towards building a network, which is one of the things that, if you invite me back, I'll talk about another time. So those are the high-level things that I wanted to say about customer. So we've talked about money, we've talked about customers. Now I want to start to put that together in what I'm calling the process of business. So money has values, customers have needs, but we are running a business. So a business is a process. And one way to think about a process is that it's a pipeline. And so we've got customers coming into the pipeline and dollars coming out of the pipeline. And so we can measure the flow through the pipeline. Now, traditional businesses and business models will measure the flow of money through the pipeline, because that's the traditional way of thinking about business. And so the advantage of money is that it's easy to convert everything into money. We can convert wages into money, and so we can convert time into money. We know the cost of buying the inputs and so on. So money is a handy way to compare our measuring against things. But one of the things that we might want to do, especially if we're taking a social enterprise view of our business is think about the triple bottom line. What are the environmental values and how are they flowing through the pipeline? And what are the social impacts of what we're doing and how are they flowing through our pipeline? Whatever it is that we're measuring, we need to be measuring the same thing through the pipeline. And the advantage that gives us is that we can measure what's happening along the way. And so that's what we'll be talking about for the rest of this presentation. How do we use the pipeline in different ways to measure things? And there's lots of different approaches to doing this. So I've just talked about it being useful. I've talked about it being measurable. The other thing is that it's very flexible so that we can apply it in different ways, as you will see. Now, back to our complicated diagram. This is what my farm looks like. How on earth can I turn that into a simple process? It's complicated. Now, generally, you'll find that there's lots of different inputs and there's quite a few different processes. But when you think about it, when you think about the amount of money that you make from different things that you sell, there will be one or two dominant activities. There will be one or two dominant processes that go on in your business. Now, sometimes there were two or three distinct processes. I worked for a water testing laboratory that did environmental engineering and also designed sewage plants and water treatment plants. So it was an engineering and construction or an engineering project management firm. It was an environmental engineering testing and investigation firm, and it had a laboratory that supported the environmental engineering. When I started to look at the processes, I said to the boss, look, your laboratory has got thousands of samples turning up every day, each of which is earning you around $10. And then you've got these engineering businesses where you spend months and months getting a contract that's earning you hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are two completely different processes. These are two completely different businesses. You've got to get different people working on answering the phones for them, on doing the selling for them, and so on. It's just madness to be trying to ride those two completely different horses running at completely different speeds. And in the end, what we did is we sold the laboratory business to a big international laboratory firm because they were much more effective at running that, and they didn't mind making a few dollars here and there on thousands and thousands of items. So the important thing is that you understand that you can simplify complex processes, and sometimes it's very useful to do that. So this process is one that I stole from a Pakistani suit seller. So it's an online business that sells suits from Pakistan everywhere in the English-speaking world. And I've pinched this process because it does exactly what I'm talking about. It puts the customer at the front. It says that where it says start, the green oval on the left-hand side, that says receive an online order for a suit. And then at the end, it says get the money from the customer. Now, they've delivered the suit before they get the money from the customer. Most online businesses that I've ever seen get the money first and then deliver the suit. So we would reverse that box for this process. But what they've focused on is the process from the order to the delivery. And what we've got here is a sub-process. This yellow bar says sub-process. And that sub-process is based on these purple decision trees. The first decision tree says, is the suit on the rack? Do we have the suit ready to post out now? And if the answer is no, then we have to go and find someone to make the suit. So this is a business that just has a website selling suits. They've got a warehouse with some suits in it. And then they've got a bunch of tailors all over their city in Pakistan who make suits for them if they haven't already got one that meets the customer's requirements. So they go out to their procurement department, place the order with the approved vendor. If the vendor says, yes, I can make the suit that the customer has ordered, then the tailor stitches the suit, they pack it and deliver it. If the tailor can't make the suit, they go back to the customer and say, sorry, we can't provide you with what you ordered. And so that is a sub-process, because it's what happens if they can't go straight through from customer order to customer delivery. Now, the important thing for us as people who care about our land, about the food we produce, who spend most of our time thinking about the process of production, is to understand where the production sits in that process. Stitch the suit is the only production that happens in this whole business flow. So the years of training and everything that all of those tailors get in making the suit is one item in one sub-process for the overall business. Now, that's really important, because if we want to create a farming business instead of a farm, we have to think about whether we want to take responsibility for all those other bits and pieces, or do we want to be part of a supply chain where all we do is prepare our product and take it to someone who is looking after those other bits and pieces. Do we want to be the tailor in this diagram, or do we want to be the salespeople? So that's an important part of understanding the process of business, because then we can start to think about our place in it. Assuming that we do want to understand what's happening at that sales process, we might look at what's called the sales pipeline. So this is a traditional sales tool. It's used in most sales courses, a lot of business courses, a lot of business management courses. And what it's doing is it's defining how we make people aware of our business, engage them in our marketing, through our marketing process to consider our product, convert them from considering our product to actually deciding to buy it, going through the specification process. So that might be as simple as getting into our shopping cart and deciding whether they want cuffs on their sleeves and a pocket on their front in the case of the suit, or it might be deciding with what they want in their box of food, if we're part of a food box delivery network, or it might be deciding whether they're going to buy only your biggest strawberries, or whether they want the seconds for jam if you are selling to a wholesaler. But there is some kind of process where you specify exactly what they want, and at the end of that process, you agree on what it is that you want to provide. An order is placed, the order is defined. So at that point, the funnel stops shrinking. So there are lots of people out there who might be interested, who we try to reach through our marketing campaign. Only some of those engage and become prospects. Only some of those get as far as the shopping cart and start to place the order, and only some of those finish placing the order. And so one of the advantages of our pipeline management is that we can measure the drop-off rate at each stage. And so we can clearly, in a numerical sense, understand how effective our marketing is, how effective our sales process is, how many people are dropping out of our checkout in our website, or in the discussion that we're having with them about the different range of products that we've got if we're in a shop or in a market. And so we can streamline those parts of the process to narrow the funnel and stop losing so many people along the way. And so that measurement process in the sales pipeline is called pipeline management. What most of those sales processes don't recognize is that we can keep that pipeline going all the way through our business, and we can measure the impacts of decisions that we make at every stage of the business and start to make operational decisions by using pipeline management through the business. And that leads to a thing called the balanced scorecard. Now, this is a balanced scorecard that comes straight from that sales pipeline process that we've used. And if you can read the screen, you can see that there are numbers there showing you how many people have dropped off at each stage. And so, or how many people are going through. So they've got 2.5 million impressions on their website, but only 540,000 are taking the free trial of the product. And so only 22% of their people are actually clicking the button that says download, get the free trial. And so they're measuring the pipeline, and they're using this dashboard to show what's happening. Now, what this graph doesn't show is how you can map that event over time. So you can see the shape of your business performance over time. So you can start to predict how many orders are you going to have to fill in a month, because there's this many people looking at this part of your website this month. Now, that's very handy in a business that's selling widgets. It's not so good on a farm where you've got seasonality coming into play and you can't produce strawberries on demand. Nevertheless, the whole concept of pipeline management has a lot of power in terms of managing your business. There's a completely different way of looking at the flow of whatever it is through your business, and that's called the theory of constraints. And so it uses pipeline analogy to understand where the inefficiencies are in your business process or your production process or your farming process. And so it can be applied to the flow of goods along a conveyor belt, or the volume of food running through various parts of your system, how much waste is occurring at each point. What it does is it looks at the point in the process which is restricting the flow through your business. And that point is called the constraint. And the point of identifying the constraint is that we know that you can't get more through the business than you can get through the constraint. There's no point in us investing money in B or D on this diagram. We have to put the money into that tiny little bit which is marked C. Because if we can't increase the constraint, then we can't increase the flow through the business. There's another trick about that, which I'll come to in a minute. Here's a different diagram based on a traffic flow. And so again, they've identified section C here, and they've labeled it constraint there so that we can see what we're talking about. And we all know this experience. We're driving up a freeway, we see the red lights ahead, everybody's stopping, and the reason they're stopping is that one lane has dropped off. And so everybody's trying to squeeze into a smaller number of lanes, and that's the constraint. The flow of traffic can only be as fast as the flow of people through that constraint. So we understand the concept of this constraint view of pipelines very, very clearly. The point is that if we are working on releasing that constraint, we're just going to shift the constraint somewhere else. So if we've got a one-lane section of the freeway here, yes, we might want to focus on that and double it. But if we put in 3 lanes, or this example's got 5 lanes in section C now, the traffic can still only flow as fast as the smallest part of the freeway, which now is section E. So we only work on one constraint at a time, but getting rid of that constraint moves the constraint to somewhere else. Now, if we think about what's happening in your farm or your farming business, there are a couple of key items that you find it very, very difficult to control. To buy more land is very, very expensive. And so your land is possibly one thing that you can't increase. The amount of sunshine that shines on your land, let's say that you can produce a certain amount of food per square metre of sunshine or per hectare. You know how much land you've got, but you don't know how much sunshine you're going to get. But it's the sunshine that allows the plant to grow. It's also the water, it's also the number of nutrients. But thanks to the marvel of fertilizers, nutrients is an input that we can control. We can buy more nutrients to increase that. So that's unlikely to be a constraint in the way that we've just been talking about. But the amount of water is much more difficult to control. We can buy more water, or we can drill more bores, but again, it's expensive. And again, there's an upper limit to the amount of water that we can get access to, as we found out through the Murray-Darling Basin process. Not that everyone acknowledges that. Some people are going, no, there's no constraint, let's get more water. But in reality, there is an upper limit to the amount of water. The other constraint that we're probably managing our farm or our farming business on is our production capacity. I can't actually do any more. I can't fit any more in. I don't have any more time. I can't, if I had 10 workers and 10 factories, then maybe the amount of land would be my constraint. But at the moment, it's the amount of time I have. Just going back to sunlight, I just wanted to quote Peter Andrews talking about all life on land is packaged sunlight. And so in his process of slowing down water, maintaining coverage of plants on the land, he was maximising the amount of water available in his soil and maximising the amount of sunlight captured by increasing the coverage of the plants on that land. By never having bare earth and not allowing the water just to flow off his land quickly after a rain event, he was maximising the amount of food that he could grow on the available land. And so that's an example of shifting the constraint. By slowing down the flow of water and by maintaining continuous coverage of plant matter, he is shifting the constraint from water and sunlight to the available land. And so that's the key thing that we need to think about. Use all the available land, capture all the available sun, and then you've got to sell all the available food. Because once you have maximised your productive capacity, you don't want your constraint to be the sales of the food, because then you will have waste, and then you are not maximising the land that you have. And so this is pointing out the weird thing about the theory of constraints. And that is that we want to keep the constraint busy. We want to identify what is our ideal constraint, and we want to keep that constraint busy. So if we think about the way an airline works, an airline has a fixed number of planes. It can buy more planes, but it doesn't like to buy planes because they cost billions of dollars. So an airline tries to manage its profitability using the planes that it has. The plane is the constraint. So it tries to keep every seat busy. And so it introduces discount airfares. And if you are booking at the last minute, you can get cheaper airfares. If you are prepared to get off the plane quickly and not carry your baggage and not buy food from the thing, you can get a very cheap airfare. And so what they're doing is they are selling those cheap seats to make sure that every seat on the aeroplane is occupied. An empty seat is a waste of their constraint. And so we think about the constraint as being the thing that has to be managed. And so that's why we need to identify what our ideal constraint is. And so if we acknowledge that probably our constraint is land, if we follow Peter Andrews' advice and maximise our use of sunlight and maximise our capturing of the available water, then we will maximise the amount of the amount that we can produce on our land. And then our land becomes our constraint. Then that's great, but that can only work if we can sell all available food. And so that leads to what I call the owner's time fallacy. In every small business and in a lot of our food production activities, we say, my productive capacity is the problem. I don't have any more time in the day. I don't have any more time in the week. I can't do more than I'm already doing. So I am the limiting factor. I'm busy all the time. What the theory of constraints tells us is that that's not good business thinking, because you are very good at some things, but you're not very good at other things. If you are the constraint, then you should be spending all your time doing only the things that you're really, really good at. And you should be paying other people to do the things that you're not so good at. But that's only possible if you've maximized your productivity. So if your productivity is based on producing food, then using your available land or maximizing the use of your available land is where you should be looking to put your constraint. And so you should be concentrating on only doing what you're good at and increasing your profitability that way so that you can afford to pay other people to do the things that you're not so good at. And that way you will get to the point where you are using all of your available land as productively as possible. Now, it's just occurred to me while I'm saying that now we are seeing new creative ways of producing food through things like rooftop farming, vertical farming, hydroponics, aquaculture, and things like that that run in parallel to using land to produce food. And so that is another way of shifting the constraint, of taking that constraint away. I've got some issues about the sustainability of those kind of food production methods and so on. I'm just mentioning that to make sure that I'm not selling you a false idea about the inevitability of land being the constraint. What I'm saying, in most of our cases, it is where we should be looking to put our constraint. What we should be doing is saying to ourselves, I want to produce as much food as possible in that land. That means I've got to sell everything that I grow. That means that I have to be as productive, be so profitable that I can afford to pay people to do the things that I'm not good at, so that I do reach that maximum possible productivity. That's what the theory of constraints is about. Now, you may not want to run your farm that way. I'm not telling you how to run your farm. I'm just explaining how the theory of constraints might help you think about making more money from your farm, if that's what interests you. So the advantages of taking this process view of business, of doing pipeline analysis, of thinking about the theory of constraints, is that you maximize throughput, you measure each step, and you get some tools to help you predict what's going to happen in the future, taking into account the vagaries of nature and the lack of control we have over rainfall and sunshine, which are important inputs in the production of food. So, if you're interested in knowing more about the theory of constraints, it's best that you go to a professional who deals with that. Robert Bolton's a chap that I've worked with over about 20 years on and off. He's working with a group called Breakthrough. I've got their web address is breakthroughprojectmanagement.com. Peter Thorby's an accountant and business consultant working in Canterbury in New Zealand, does a lot of work with farmers in that part of New Zealand. The company is called Viago. Peter described himself as the founder of Viago, but Viago is based in Sydney now. Their website is viagointernational.com. I'll provide those links in the chat later on. Andrew Kay is a TOC specialist. His company is called TOC Cubed. Probably a little bit expensive. He would describe himself as a bit high level for most of us involved in food production. If you were Woolworths or, you know, a farming conglomerate, you would probably go to Andrew Kay, but it's certainly worth looking at his website, and that's toc3.com.au. toc3.com.au, TOC standing for Theory of Constraints. So there's different ways of looking at the theory of constraints, simpler versions, more complicated versions, but I found it a very, very powerful way to look at the process of business and think about which activities are beneficial or not. So just summarising my sort of storm through those three different areas, money enables our goals. If we're not making money from our activities, if we don't look after our income, then we will lose the farm. And that's the reality for a lot of farming families. The number of small farms is reducing in Australia at a shocking rate, and those farms are being bought up by major conglomerates who hire managers who are often managing what used to be 4, 5, 6, 7 farms at a time. The other thing that's happening is most farmers and most farming families have a second job to keep the farm going. So that's the reality of farming in Australia right now. So whatever our personal values and attitudes to money, it's an important part of the discussion about how we create a sustainable farming future. As soon as we start to think about the money in our farming activity, we are really shifting into a business framing. And unless we want to hand over that part of that business part of the operation to someone else and be a producer for a business network or a marketer or some other sort of organisation, we have to think about the customer. And that means that we have to really shift our thinking, and we have to understand that the process of our business as the customer sees it has very little to do with the operational and the production side of our business, and is all to do with our interface to the customer and the process that we use to deliver, to package and deliver goods. For example, I was interviewing a manufacturer of chili sauce. Now, he was keen to work with local businesses, but I was speaking to him at the market about the number of local producers who were at the same market as him who had chilies. And I said, is it worth my while going to each of those chili growers and telling them to come and talk to you? And he said, no, I'm sick of them. I can't talk to these small operations. I'm going with the bigger guys. And I said, why? You know, you're a small business. Why aren't you supporting other small businesses? He said, they refuse to sort their chilies by size. And I said, come on, really? Fair dinkum. Are you telling me that you won't buy chilies from a small farmer because they don't sort their chilies by size? He said, the amount of time it takes me to sort the chilies means that I'm effectively doubling the price of that I pay for them. If I buy my chilies from a farmer who's got a sorting machine and sorts the chilies by size, I can put them straight into my production process without sorting. That means that I'm getting the chilies much, much cheaper from the guy with the sorting machine than I am from the small farmers. And so I kept that in mind. And then later I was talking to a macadamia producer who had developed a way of drying his macadamia nuts using solar energy on a black roof. And so he was capturing the heat from the sun and pumping that hot air through his macadamia nuts instead of blowing air from an electric radiator through his macadamia nuts, which is how most macadamia farmers in northern New South Wales dry their macadamias. And he was getting such good results because it was a computer-controlled drying system. So he knew exactly how much moisture was in his nuts, and he had a controlled temperature of the nut. The temperature that the nuts were dried at was controlled through the whole process. And so he was getting such high prices for his nuts because they were so well dried that he was able to start drying nuts for other farmers and building his operation. And so his constraint became the drying shed. And so to maximize his drying shed, he was drying other people's nuts. And so his business grew so big that he built a second shed. And then he sold the whole production to a conglomerate that was taking over the macadamia farms. So while we might not like the fact that the small farm got sold, we certainly like the fact that this macadamia nut farmer, through thinking smartly about what his constraint was, using sustainable renewable energy to make a better drying system, was able to get a return on his investment and grow. So that's an example, I guess. I lost my train of thought by getting carried away about the black shed nut drying. But the point is that we can take advantage of this stuff in a small-scale sustainable operation and grow our business by being smarter.